Over 500,000 teenagers in the United States now have gonorrhea or syphilis, and the number is rising. We now have more antibiotics than ever before, more certain cures. Yet we face a national and international epidemic.
Those who would argue that the 60s marked the end of the good old days, the end of family stability, the end of everything being predictable and comfortable, and that was when divorce went up, and that's when people started to question family life and all of those kinds of things, and that's when sexuality ran amok. I mean, there are certain ways you can look at those indicators, but on the most basic level, what I think is important to understand is that the children of the 60s, baby boom children growing up, in some ways behaved a whole lot more like their grandparents than they behaved like their parents. So if we take the long view, what do we see happening in their grandparents' lives? Well, the grandparents grew up in the early decades of the 20th century. What happened then? Massive consumer revolution, a massive sexual revolution. The incidence, if we just want to look at premarital sexual intercourse, which is a very bad indicator of sexual activity, but the one that everyone is obsessed with. So if we want to just look at that, there have really been only 2 times in the last century that particular sexual behavior increased dramatically. One time was in the early 20th century, and the second time was in the 60s.
During the 1950s, women felt societal pressure to focus their aspirations on becoming a wife and mother. Women were expected to remain virgins until marriage because unwedded pregnant women were ostracized by society. Women in the 1950s married young and bare children right after. The U.S. marriage rate was at an all-time high because remaining single was undesirable. This high rate in marriage caused the 1950s to be the era of the happy homemaker. Women were encouraged to stay at home to cook and clean for their families. The happy homemaker was idolized in the media, commercials, pictures, and magazines. In the 1960s, new inventions made no strings attached sex more of a possibility for the whole country. Cures for some STDs like syphilis and gonorrhea were created, as well as the contraceptive pill. Condoms and cervical bands also contributed to people being less worried about contracting a disease or getting pregnant. Sex rates shot through the roof as sexuality and premarital sex caused a huge culture change. Due to the new inventions and the women's movement that encouraged female sexuality, the sexual revolution began. The sex revolution, also known as sexual liberation, was a social movement that challenged traditional codes of behavior related to sexuality throughout the 1960s. It increased the acceptance of sex outside of traditional heterosexual monogamous relationships. Women challenged the double standard that allowed men to have sex but disapproved of women doing the same. A new awareness of human sexuality began to spread after a Kinsey report that opened minds to diversity of sexual behavior. The report became a bestseller, and people around the world were now seeking sexual pleasure. The hippie movement of the 1960s also contributed to the sex revolution. The idea of free love and the view of sex as something beautiful was spread across the world. People began to embrace sexual freedom and perform sex acts publicly. The idea of free love allowed people to perform sex acts with anyone, anywhere, at any time without guilt. The sexual revolution opened the gates for homosexuality. More gays were expressing themselves now more than ever and fighting for their rights. Hippies and other liberals supported gay rights while others condemned it. These different views caused moral battles that continue today. The image of women changed drastically in the media, magazines, and movies. Fashion went in a whole different direction in the 1960s to emphasize women's sexuality. The miniskirt took the world by storm, revealing legs, thighs, and sometimes more. See-through tops and the rejection of the bra allowed women to have power over their femininity as well as sexuality. In 1960, Playboy became the nation's first mass-circulating porn magazine. Women considered Playboy because it was the most exciting job around. When Playboy launched, it was a literary power and a force for change. It was offered as an intellectual magazine as well as a pinup. Today, sex is accepted in daily life and society. Our society loves and glorifies sex, much like the sexual revolution. Whether if sexual culture is considered a positive advance or a decrease of morality, it is one that we live in every day.
How serious is the VD problem? Let's compare it with some other diseases in the United States today. Over 500,000 teenagers in the United States now have gonorrhea or syphilis, and the number is rising. We now have more antibiotics than ever before, more certain cures. Yet we face a national and international epidemic.
Taken my bows and my curtain calls. You brought me fame and fortune and everything that goes with it. I thank you all, but it's been no bed of roses, no pleasure cruise. I consider it a challenge before the whole human race, and I ain't gonna lose. And I need to go.
Reading something that was in the New York Times earlier this summer. The 20s, the New York Times tells us, are a black box, and there is a lot of churning in there. 1/3 of people in their 20s move to a new residence every year. 40% move back home with their parents at least once. They go through an average of 7 jobs in their 20s, more job changes than in any other stretch. 2/3 spend at least some time living with a romantic partner without being married, and marriage occurs later than ever. The median age at first marriage in the early 1970s, when the baby boomers were young, was 21 for women and 23 for men. By 2009, it had climbed to 26 for women and 28 for men. 5 years in a little more than a generation.
"30 is the new 20. People used to enter a sort of stable young adulthood by the age of 21 or 22. They were finished with their education, they were married or about to be married, they were new parents or about to become new parents, and they had basically settled into the structure of an adult life. Now those transitions mostly take place closer to 30. So people stay in education longer than they ever did before. More people get post-secondary education than ever before. People marry later, people have their first child later, and they have fewer children than was true 50 years ago. Put it all together, and the 20s become entirely different than they were half a century ago. 20s, they're by no means lazy. They're in fact working very hard at a series of low-paying jobs, most of them, while they try to find some kind of work that they want to commit themselves to and that they can really enjoy.
Section revolution, love is not the word.
relationships are getting increasingly more difficult to navigate these days? Why fewer couples are getting married and later than ever before?
Time for a crash course on the economics of sex. Men and women both enjoy sex. We all know that. But what's interesting is how the data tells us that men and women experience sex differently. On average, men have a higher sex drive than women.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12.
Blame it on testosterone, call it whatever you want. But on average, men initiate sex more than women.
If women were squarely in charge of how their relationships transpired and demanded a higher market price for the exchange of sex, so to speak, we'd be seeing, on average, more impressive wooing efforts,
Greater male investment,
longer relationships,
fewer premarital partners,
shorter cohabitations.
and more marrying going on.
For a woman to know what she wants in a relationship and to signal it clearly, especially if it's different than what most men want, this is her power in the economy. But none of these things seem to be occurring. Not now, at least.
Today, the economics of contemporary sexual relationships clearly favor men and what they want, even while what they are offering in the exchange has diminished. And it's all thanks to
Supply
demand
and the long reach of a remarkable little pill.
Supply and demand. When supplies are high, prices drop, since people won't pay more for something that's easy to find.
But if it's hard to find, people will pay a premium. And the same rings true with sex.
Men know that sex is cheap these days, if they know where to look.
So how did we get here? How did the market value of sex decline so drastically? Economists often speak of technological shocks that dramatically alter markets.
Take pesticides, for example. Pesticides revolutionized agriculture, enabling its mass production on a level unparalleled in the history of human civilization.
Lawns became greener, produce became better, and widely available with a marvelous variety.
We eat like kings now, and the market has changed forever.
Here's another example. Artificial hormonal contraception, or the pill, allowed men and women to have sex while avoiding pregnancy. This was a technological shock that forever altered the mating market by profoundly lowering the cost of sex. It didn't change overnight, but the effects have been, one might say, revolutionary.
Before contraception, sex before marriage took place during the search for a mate, someone to marry. Sex didn't necessarily mean marriage, but serious commitment was commonly a requirement for sex. Sex was oriented towards marriage.
Don't believe people who say your great-grandparents were secretly as casual about sex as your friends are. They weren't, because to mess around with sex eventually meant, well, becoming parents.
Remember the example of pesticides? It turns out that they had unforeseen effects that are wreaking havoc on the environment and weakening the natural ecological systems that we depend on.
Scientists believe that because of pesticides, the bee population is dropping at an alarming rate. 1/3 of all the food we eat depends on those bees for pollination. And that's just one example.
It is now feared that the overuse of pesticides is throwing ecology as we know it into disarray.
While the original purpose of the pill was to prevent pregnancy, the data reveals an unanticipated side effect. The pill threw the mating market into disarray.
Having sex and thinking about marriage have now become two quite different things.
Misinformation about condom usage tends to fly under the banner of promoting abstinence. But instead of convincing people to abstain, these lies about condoms just make it harder to get condoms, use condoms, or bother to use condoms. And it's that, more than sex itself, that promotes the spread of disease and unintended pregnancy.